The Christmas tree was 11 feet tall. I know because I'd asked. I ask questions like that, precise, specific, the kind of question that makes people think you're making small talk when really you're building a model of the room. 11 feet. Imported from a farm in Vermont. Decorated by a service that charged $4,000 and came with a non-disclosure agreement, because apparently even Christmas trees in this family required confidentiality. Beneath that tree, wrapped in silver paper with a bow too perfect to have been tied by human hands, was a gift addressed to me. I didn't open it until after dinner. That was deliberate. Because I already knew, from the particular way my mother-in-law had looked at it twice during the meal, that it wasn't a gift at all. It was a 31-page postnuptial agreement. And the pen taped to the top of the box was solid gold, engraved with my husband's family crest. Because if you're going to ask someone to sign away their financial identity, you should at least do it with style. Before I tell you what I put on the table after I unwrapped it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. My name is Claire. I'm 33 years old. To the Hartwell family, I am the woman their son Nathaniel met at a conference 2 years ago. A woman with a consulting business. A phrase Nathaniel's mother, Eleanor, said the way other people say hobby farm, politely, with a faint condescension reserved for things she assumed weren't quite real. To the rest of the world, I am the founder and CEO of a fintech advisory firm that restructures distressed mid-market companies. I was profiled in Forbes 11 months ago, in a feature about founders under 40 who built something without inherited capital. The Hartwells had never read it. Not because it wasn't available. Because they had never thought to look. They didn't ask what I built. They asked what my father did. When I told them he'd been a high school shop teacher for 30 years, the conversation moved on the way conversations move on when people have already gotten the answer they expected. That was their first mistake. Not the postnup. The not asking. I want you to understand the family I married into, because the postnup didn't come out of nowhere. It came from 2 years of careful, patient arithmetic. Eleanor Hartwell ran the family the way she ran her charitable foundation board, with elegant authority and a spreadsheet mind disguised as warmth. She had a particular gift for saying devastating things while smiling, the kind of smile that made you feel slightly insane for being hurt by it. The first Christmas Nathaniel brought me home, Eleanor had asked me, over appetizers, what my 5-year plan was. I told her I planned to grow my firm to 50 employees and expand into 2 new verticals. She had nodded, taken a sip of wine, and said, "That's very sweet," in the exact tone you'd use for a child's plan to become an astronaut. Nathaniel's father, Walter, was quieter, more transactional. He had built the family's real estate holding company from a single strip mall into a portfolio worth, I happened to know, because I'd read the public filings on a related REIT, somewhere north of $90 million. Walter didn't dismiss me outright. He simply treated every conversation as a negotiation, sizing up whether I was an asset or a liability to the family ledger. Nathaniel's sister Olivia was the wild card. Sweet in private, performative in public, with a habit of repeating her mother's opinions back at family events like she was workshopping them for approval. For 2 years, I watched this family quietly assess me. I watched them ask Nathaniel pointed questions when I wasn't in the room. Nathaniel told me about most of them, guiltily, the way you confess something you know is wrong but can't quite stop participating in. Does she have her own money or is she expecting yours? Has she ever actually closed a deal, or does she just talk about closing deals? I never corrected the record. Not because I was hiding anything. Because nobody asked the right question. That's the thing about being underestimated. You don't have to lie. You just have to let people's assumptions do the lying for them. By the time Nathaniel and I got engaged, 14 months ago, the family's quiet skepticism had organized itself into something more structural. Eleanor began referencing protecting the family's interests at increasing frequency. Walter started a habit of mentioning, almost as throwaway lines, what assets were held in trust versus what was Marital property going forward. Olivia, predictably, began repeating phrases like, "You have to think practically about these things," at every family dinner, as if she'd rehearsed them. Nathaniel, to his credit, told them repeatedly that he didn't want a prenup. He'd said it before we got engaged, said it again after, told his parents directly that he trusted me completely and didn't see the need. Eleanor had agreed to drop it. Publicly. What she actually did was wait 11 months, until after the wedding, when the word prenup had become legally irrelevant and the only tool left was a postnuptial agreement, which requires my voluntary signature, but which families like the Hartwells have learned to extract using a particular kind of pressure, timing, ceremony, and the performance of love disguised as protection. She chose Christmas Eve deliberately. The whole family gathered. The tree, the gifts, the wine, the specific warmth of a room that wants you to feel too comfortable to say no. I knew it was coming 3 days before. Not because anyone told me directly, because Nathaniel, who is a wonderful man and a terrible liar, had been unable to look at me properly since Eleanor called him into the study during a visit the previous weekend. I put them in a plain folder. I did not tell Nathaniel. Christmas Eve arrived with the particular hush of a house that has been professionally decorated into submission. Garland on every banister. A fire that had clearly never had actual smoke near it. Eleanor moved through the rooms like a woman conducting a symphony only she could hear. Dinner was lovely in the specific, slightly exhausting way Hartwell dinners always were. Performed graciousness, careful conversation, Walter discussing a commercial acquisition in Connecticut, Olivia describing a ski trip in granular detail nobody had asked for. I sat beside Nathaniel, who held my hand under the table for most of the meal, occasionally squeezing it the way you squeeze something to make sure it's still there. After dinner, we moved to the living room for gifts. Eleanor handed them out personally, one at a time, narrating each one with a small story about why she'd chosen it. When she got to my gift, the last one, naturally, she smiled and said, "This one's a little different." I unwrapped it slowly. 31 pages. The gold pen taped to the cover. The first page read, Postnuptial Agreement between Nathaniel James Hartwell and Claire Whitfield Hartwell. The room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when everyone already knows what's happening and is waiting to see who says it out loud first. "We just think," Eleanor said, settling back into her chair with her wine, "that given everything ahead for this family, it makes sense to have clarity. This isn't personal, Claire. It's simply responsible." Walter added in his transactional way, "It protects everyone. Including you, frankly." Olivia said nothing, but nodded at her mother with the specific loyalty of someone who'd rehearsed agreement in advance. Nathaniel's hand had gone still in mine. I felt him start to speak, to apologize, to intervene, to do the thing he always did, which was absorb the discomfort so no one else had to. I squeezed his hand once. A signal. "Let me. I appreciate you thinking of this," I said, turning the pages slowly. "It's very thorough." "Walter's attorney drafted it," Eleanor said, with the satisfaction of someone presenting a particularly good wine pairing. "I can tell," I said. "There's a clause on page 19 about intellectual property generated during the marriage reverting to separate ownership. That's a thoughtful addition. Most boilerplate templates miss that." Eleanor blinked. She had not expected me to read the document that closely, that fast, with that kind of fluency. "You understand it then?" Walter said, leaning forward slightly. "I understand it completely," I said. I set the document down on the coffee table, next to the half-empty box of chocolates, and a candle that smelled, somewhat aggressively, like cinnamon. "I have something for the family too," I said. "I almost forgot." I reached into my bag and pulled out the plain folder. I opened it and slid the first page across the coffee table. The Forbes feature, printed cleanly, my name in the headline. "You may have seen this already," I said. It ran in February. "Founders under 40, building without the family name." Eleanor picked it up. I watched her read the headline. I watched her read my name beneath it. I watched the specific physical stillness of a person whose internal model of the world has just received information it cannot easily file. "This is you," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "That's me," I said. I slid the second page across. The valuation summary. "This is the most recent estimate of my firm's value, based on a growth investment we're finalizing in January," I said. "I'd ask that this stays private. It's not public yet, but I wanted the family to understand the actual shape of things, since we're apparently doing full disclosure tonight." Walter picked it up. He read the number. I watched him do the thing men like Walter do when a number surprises them. The small recalculation behind otherwise composed features. The silent resorting of where someone belongs in a hierarchy he'd already finalized. "This can't be right," he said, not unkindly, more like a man checking his own math. "It's been independently verified twice," I said. "Once by Forbes' research team, once by the P Group's diligence team 3 weeks ago." Olivia had gone very quiet, looking between her parents with the expression of someone watching a script she'd memorized suddenly stop matching the scene. "I don't understand," Eleanor said, and for the first time in 2 years, her voice had lost its careful, managed warmth. "Why wouldn't you have told us this?" I looked at her for a long moment. "I tried," I said. "I told you about my work more than once. I described client engagements at this table. I mentioned the Forbes interview when it happened, at dinner, in March. You asked Olivia about her tennis lesson directly afterward. The room was silent except for the fire that had never had real smoke in it. I'm not upset that you didn't know," I said. "I'm telling you this because you handed me 31 pages tonight built on the assumption that I am bringing nothing into this marriage that needs protecting. I wanted you to have accurate information before any of us decides what protecting the family actually means." I slid the third page across, the one-page assets summary. "For what it's worth," I said, "I'm not opposed to a postnup in principle. I think reasonable people can have reasonable conversations about financial structure in a marriage. What I'm not willing to do is sign something built on a 31-page assumption that I'm the risk in this relationship, when the actual numbers suggest a slightly more complicated picture." Walter set the page down. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, like a man recalculating not just my net worth, but his own certainty. I want to be honest about what happened in the minutes after that, because it wasn't dramatic in the way these moments sometimes are in stories. Nobody yelled. No one stormed out. The Hartwells, to their credit, were not cruel people pretending to be polite. They were genuinely polite people who had made a quiet, persistent error in judgment, and watching that error become visible to them was its own kind of consequence. Eleanor asked, eventually, in a smaller voice than I'd heard her use before, why I'd let it go on this long. Why I hadn't simply told them outright. "Because you never asked?" I said. "Not really. You asked about my father's job. You asked about my 5-year plan in the tone you'd use for a child's drawing. I kept waiting for a real question, and it never came. I stopped offering information to a room that wasn't listening." Nathaniel finally spoke. He picked up the Postnup from the coffee table, looked at it for a long moment, and set it back down without opening it again. "I don't want this," he said to his mother, with more clarity than I'd heard from him in 2 years. "I never wanted this. I should have stopped it before tonight instead of just feeling bad about it." Eleanor didn't argue. She looked, for once, like a woman doing genuine arithmetic instead of performing certainty. "I'd like to actually know you," she said to me, quietly. "Properly. Not the version I assumed." I told her that was something we could work toward. I didn't promise it would be easy. I didn't pretend 2 years of being filed away under consultant, and not quite serious, would dissolve over one folder of documents. But I picked up my wine glass. I looked at the 11-foot tree, the fire, the gold pen still taped uselessly to an unsigned cover page. I didn't feel triumphant. Triumph is loud, and the room had gone quiet in a way that felt more like the start of something than the end of it. What I felt was the specific, settled relief of a woman who had spent 2 years being patient with people's assumptions, and had finally, gently, put the real numbers on the table. The postnup stayed and signed. The gold pen stayed in its box. And for the first time in 2 Christmases, the Hartwells asked me a real question, and waited, actually waited, to hear the answer. Have you ever let people underestimate you simply because they never bothered to ask the right question? Tell me in the comments. And if someone in your life has already decided what you're worth without checking, remember, you don't owe them a correction. You just owe yourself the patience to wait for the moment the truth becomes impossible to ignore.